Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. I had a landlord, Derek, who was pretty absent. I lived in this building, a high-rise, about 20 stories, for 10 plus years starting in 2012. He, despite living next door to me, was absent and cold personally, but cool enough. Rent was good. Our agreement was never bother him about anything unless it was an absolute emergency. Showerhead wonky? Go buy a new one, he told me when I first moved in. Fridge breaks? Get it fixed, or dude, just buy a new one. Take it out of what you pay in rent. Lost the receipt? I don't care. I know more or less what a fridge costs, just take it out of rent. Finally, in 2022, his wife Sheila decides she wants more rent, wants to rent the place out as an office, not legal, and wants us out ASAP. I agree to move out a month early and get a month's rent back plus deposit, complete 180 on their part. When I was packing up, they came by to inspect. The place is ruined, Derek said, walking around with a clipboard. Can't give you anything until you fix all this stuff. What are you talking about? I asked. We had an agreement. Sheila pointed at various spots around the apartment. Look at all this damage. Two main things. My cats did scratch up the leather legs of the dining table, and the pull-up bar made 2 dents in the doorframe of the kitchen, which was quite nice hardwood. They came to me with this list of tons of stuff like, oh, you hung a photo frame here, this tile is slightly chipped. This was the busiest work time of the year for me, but I was trying to be cooperative. Sure, I said. I'll get the table legs re-leathered, spackle the photo frame wall hole. Can't do anything about the door frame, take it out of deposit. I patched the tile, like dozens of little everyday wear and tear things. You want me to change the window screens? I asked in disbelief. These are all new screens and in nicer shape than when I moved in. They're not the original screens, Sheila insisted. But I did them all. I trusted the guy. Gotta get my money. At the end, he should have been giving me 24,000 RMB, about $3,300. He gave me 5,000. I still need to use the money to fix all that stuff, Derek said, handing me the envelope with a straight face. If you can't accept the 5, I can't give you anything at all. I was super pissed off, but took the 5. Now, people in the building are gossipy. I don't participate, but I did tell this one older lady, Mrs. Zhang, about my frustration. That's absolutely terrible, she said. After 10 years of being a good tenant, she told everyone. Sheila went from being the star of the mommies group of the building to nobody wanting to talk to her. People shunned Derek too. I originally told them I was planning on moving to another city, but an opportunity came up and I ended up renting a similar unit in the same building, so they thought they could just screw me over and not have to see me, but now they still did. Often. In 2023, the building office calls me with some question about how to do something with the floor heating. I go to check out my old apartment and notice the door frame is not fixed, still has dents. I called Derek. What the hell, man? You kept most of my deposit to fix things and you never fixed the door frame. Mind your own business, he snapped before hanging up. In early 2024, I see the light at my old place is still on at 3 a.m. That's odd. I go to check. The door is open and the place is just trashed, ruined, cabinets broken, stuff written on the walls saying lazy landlord, and the dents on the kitchen door frame are still there. So Derek never fixed anything, just kept my money. By this time, smartphones were popular and we had a WeChat group for the whole building, so about 500 people. I took pictures and posted everything. Remember that landlord who kept my deposit for repairs? Well, looks like he never did any of them. And now his new tenants have trashed the place. Apparently, he had also taken these people's deposit, and there was a huge ruckus when they trashed the place, cops called. All these people chimed in with complaints and pictures. He did the same to us last year, one tenant wrote. He threatened to keep our entire security deposit for a tiny scratch on the floor, another added. People posted videos of problems in the building, people smoking in the hallways, leaving leaky garbage outside the front door, videos of people using foul language in front of children, dirty footprints. All while Derek and Sheila collect rent and do nothing, Mrs. Zhang wrote in the group. Derek got fined a lot for 1, creating a public disturbance, 2, degrading the quality of the living space, 3, illegally renting a residence as an office, and to top it off, the building management wouldn't grant him permission to have workers in to fix the place, so it sat there empty for like 6 months. The fines were big too. I ran into him in the elevator a few weeks later. He looked away. How's the apartment coming along? I asked. He just stared at the floor numbers. Take about 1.5 months rent from me. Lose a year's rent. Suck it, bro. The next one is an entitled people story. When my wife and I bought our house 3 years ago, the neighborhood seemed perfect. Quiet streets, well-maintained properties, and what appeared to be a reasonable homeowners association that kept things looking nice without being too intrusive. Boy, was I wrong about that last part. For context, I'm a police officer with about 12 years on the force, currently working as a detective in the Property Crimes Division. My wife works as a nurse at the local hospital. We're both pretty busy people who just want to come home to a peaceful house after dealing with the chaos of our respective jobs. We keep our lawn mowed, our house painted, and we don't throw loud parties or park broken down cars in our driveway. In other words, we're the kind of neighbors most people would be happy to have. The trouble started about 6 months ago when the HOA got new leadership. The previous board was made up of mostly older retirees who treated the position like a casual volunteer gig. They'd send out the occasional reminder about holiday decorations or street cleaning, but otherwise left everyone alone. The new president, however, was a different story entirely. This guy had recently moved to the neighborhood after selling his previous house and apparently had nothing better to do than micromanage every aspect of our community. Within his first month in office, he'd already sent out 3 different notices about various violations he'd observed during his daily walks around the neighborhood. Everything from trash cans being visible from the street to mailbox posts that weren't exactly the right shade of black. My first real encounter with him came when I found a bright yellow notice stuck to my front door one evening after work. The violation: my garage door was excessively weathered and needed to be repainted within 30 days to maintain community standards. I looked at my garage door, which admittedly had some minor fading on the bottom panels where the sun hit it most directly, but was otherwise in perfectly fine condition. It was maybe 5 years old and looked better than half the garage doors in the neighborhood. I figured it was just an overzealous new board member trying to make his mark, so I repainted the damn thing. Spent my weekend off with a brush and some matching paint, making my garage door look showroom fresh. Problem solved, right? Wrong. 2 weeks later, another notice appeared. This time, my front yard landscaping was apparently inconsistent with community aesthetic standards. The specific complaint was that I had planted some native wildflowers along my front walkway instead of the traditional grass and shrubs combo that most houses had. These weren't weeds or anything unsightly. They were actually quite beautiful and attracted butterflies and bees, which I thought was a nice touch. But according to the HOA president, they violated some obscure clause in the community guidelines about maintaining visual uniformity. I started to get annoyed, but I pulled up the wildflowers and planted some generic bushes instead. My wife was pretty irritated about losing her butterfly garden, but we figured it was easier to just comply than fight over landscaping. That's when things really started to escalate. The notices kept coming, each one more ridiculous than the last. My outdoor light fixture was too modern for the neighborhood's aesthetic. The small American flag I had hanging from my porch was apparently the wrong size according to some subsection of the community rules. Even my doormat came under scrutiny. Apparently it was supposed to be earth tone colors only, and my blue mat was a violation. Each time I'd get these formal notices with increasingly threatening language about fines and further action if I didn't comply. And each time, like an idiot, I'd fix whatever petty issue they'd identified. I was trying to keep the peace and avoid any drama that might interfere with my work or my wife's job. The breaking point came about 2 months ago. I just finished a particularly difficult case involving a series of burglaries in an upscale neighborhood across town. I was exhausted and looking forward to a quiet weekend at home when I found not just a notice but an actual certified letter waiting for me. This wasn't about paint colors or plants. The letter informed me that I was in violation of a community rule regarding unauthorized alterations to property structure, and that I had 10 days to remedy the situation or face immediate legal action. The violation in question? A small security camera I'd installed above my front door after our neighborhood had experienced a few package thefts earlier in the year. Now, this camera wasn't some massive, obvious surveillance setup. It was a small, discrete unit that was barely visible unless you were specifically looking for it. It didn't point at anyone else's property or record anything beyond my own front porch and walkway. As a police officer, I knew exactly what was and wasn't legal when it came to home security systems, and my setup was completely within my rights as a homeowner. But according to the letter, any external security devices required prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee, and since I hadn't requested permission, I was in violation. The letter went on to state that if I didn't remove the camera within 10 days, the HOA would pursue all available legal remedies to enforce compliance. This was where I started to push back. I wrote a polite but firm response explaining that the camera was completely legal, pointed only at my own property, and served a legitimate security purpose. I cited the relevant state laws regarding homeowner rights and security systems, figuring that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Not only did they reject my explanation, but they doubled down. I received another certified letter, this one even more aggressive in tone, stating that my continued defiance of community standards would result in immediate legal action. They were demanding not just the removal of the camera, but also a fine of $500 for willful violation of community guidelines. That's when I decided to do a little research. As a detective, I'd learned that the best way to deal with bureaucratic bullies was to understand exactly what power they actually had versus what they claimed to have. I spent an evening going through our HOA's governing documents, community guidelines, and the relevant state laws regarding homeowners associations. What I found was interesting. While HOAs do have significant power to enforce certain community standards, they have to follow very specific legal procedures when it comes to fines, liens, or other serious enforcement actions. They can't just declare someone in violation and start demanding money. There are requirements for proper notice, opportunities for hearings, appeals processes, and various other legal safeguards. More importantly, I discovered that our HOA had been pretty sloppy about following their own procedures. The notices I'd been receiving didn't include information about my right to request a hearing. The fines they were threatening weren't properly documented or approved through the required board voting process. And their architectural review committee that was supposedly enforcing these rules, it didn't actually exist, at least not as a properly constituted committee according to their own bylaws. Armed with this information, I wrote another letter, this one a bit more detailed in explaining why their enforcement actions were procedurally invalid. I pointed out the various ways they'd failed to follow their own guidelines and suggested that we should probably just agree to disagree about the camera and move on. Their response was to escalate even further. I came home from work one day to find a notice taped to my door that wasn't from the HOA president, but from a law firm claiming to represent the homeowners association. This lawyer's letter informed me that the HOA was initiating formal legal proceedings to place a lien on my property and potentially force a sale to recover their fines and legal fees. Now I was genuinely angry. This had gone from petty neighborhood politics to someone actually threatening my home and my family's financial security. The letter gave me 30 days to cure all violations and pay all assessed fees, or face immediate legal action to protect the community's interests. But here's where things got interesting. As I read through the lawyer's letter more carefully, I noticed they were making some pretty specific legal claims about my repeated violations and refusal to comply with lawful HOA directives. They were essentially accusing me of being some kind of rogue homeowner who was flagrantly ignoring reasonable community standards. That gave me an idea. If they wanted to pursue this through the legal system, then we'd do it exactly by the book. And since they were claiming I was in violation of lawful directives, I decided to respond to their demands with the kind of thorough compliance that only someone with law enforcement experience could provide. I started by filing a formal written response to every single allegation in their letter, requesting detailed documentation of each supposed violation. I wanted copies of the board meeting minutes where these violations were officially discussed and approved. I wanted evidence that their architectural review committee was properly constituted and had authority to make these determinations. I wanted proof that their fine structure had been legally established and approved according to state law. I also requested a formal hearing, as was my right under both HOA bylaws and state law. But here's where my police background came in handy. I knew exactly how to format these requests to create maximum paperwork and bureaucratic burden for them. I submitted everything in triplicate with certified mail receipts and demanded specific response timelines. While I was waiting for their response, I decided to do a little more investigating. One of the advantages of being a police officer is that you have access to various databases and records that regular citizens don't. I looked up the HOA president and the law firm he'd hired just to see what I was dealing with. What I found was illuminating. The law firm was a small outfit that specialized in HOA enforcement actions, but they had a pretty questionable track record. They'd been sanctioned by the State Bar Association twice in the past 5 years for improper billing practices, and had several ongoing complaints about their collection methods. More interesting was what I found about the HOA president himself. This guy had been involved in similar disputes at his previous neighborhood, where he'd actually been removed from the HOA board by a vote of the homeowners after multiple complaints about harassment and abuse of power. Armed with this information, I started reaching out to my neighbors. I'd been so focused on just complying with the HOA's demands that I hadn't really talked to anyone else about what was going on. What I discovered was that I wasn't the only one being targeted. The HOA president had been systematically harassing multiple homeowners with increasingly ridiculous violation notices. One neighbor had been fined for having a non-standard house number font. Another was being threatened with legal action because his sidewalk had some minor cracking that was supposedly a safety hazard. A couple down the street were facing hundreds of dollars in fines because their teenage son's car was allegedly parked in their driveway for too many consecutive days without being moved. The more I talked to people, the clearer it became that this wasn't about community standards at all. The HOA president was on a power trip, and he'd found a law firm willing to help him bully homeowners into compliance through threats and intimidation. That's when I decided it was time for some serious malicious compliance. The HOA's latest demand was that I attend a compliance hearing where I would have the opportunity to explain my continued defiance and hopefully reach a reasonable resolution. They wanted me to show up, apologize for my violations, agree to remove my security camera, and pay a settlement fee to cover their legal costs. I agreed to attend the hearing, but I had some conditions. Since they were treating this as a formal legal proceeding, I wanted it conducted according to proper legal standards. I requested that the hearing be recorded, that I be allowed to present evidence and call witnesses, and that the HOA provide documentation supporting their authority to conduct such a hearing. I also mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that since this was now a legal matter involving threats to my property, I'd be attending the hearing in my capacity as a sworn police officer and would be evaluating whether any laws were being broken during the process. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday evening at the community clubhouse. I showed up in my dress uniform, complete with badge and service weapon, carrying a thick folder of documents and a digital recorder. The HOA president was there along with 2 other board members and the lawyer from the law firm they'd hired. The reaction when I walked in was immediately obvious. The lawyer, in particular, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The HOA president tried to maintain his aggressive posture, but I could see him glancing nervously at my uniform and badge. The hearing started with the lawyer reading through their list of allegations and demands. I listened politely, taking notes and occasionally asking for clarification about specific legal citations or procedural requirements. Then it was my turn to respond. I started by thanking them for agreeing to conduct the hearing according to proper legal standards, since that would make it much easier for me to evaluate whether any criminal violations had occurred during their enforcement process. I then began going through their allegations one by one, but not in the way they expected. Instead of defending my actions, I started documenting theirs. I pointed out that threatening liens and foreclosure without following proper legal procedures could constitute harassment under state law. I noted that their fine structure hadn't been properly established according to HOA legal requirements, which meant their collection efforts could be considered fraudulent. I mentioned that using a law firm to send threatening letters without proper legal authority might constitute extortion. The lawyer started looking very uncomfortable and actually interrupted me to suggest that maybe we could work something out without getting into technical legal issues, but I wasn't done. I pulled out copies of similar violation notices that had been sent to my neighbors and started reading through the various threats and demands. I pointed out that conducting a systematic harassment campaign against multiple homeowners could constitute organized criminal activity under state RICO statutes. Then I got to the really good part. I'd done some research into the HOA's finances and discovered that the board president had been using HOA funds to pay for the law firm's services without proper board approval. In other words, he'd been essentially stealing money from the community fund to pay for his personal vendetta against homeowners he didn't like. I had documents showing the unauthorized payments, copies of bank records that I'd obtained through legal channels, and evidence that the board had never actually voted to authorize the legal action they were threatening me with. The room got very quiet as I laid out this evidence. The lawyer was frantically taking notes and whispering with the HOA president. The other board members were looking increasingly confused and alarmed as they realized they'd been signing off on actions they didn't fully understand. Finally, I got to my conclusion. Since they'd demanded that I comply with their legal directives, I was happy to do exactly that. As a sworn police officer, when I became aware of potential criminal activity, I was legally required to investigate and report it to the appropriate authorities. I informed them that based on the evidence I'd gathered, I would be filing a formal complaint with the district attorney's office regarding the misuse of HOA funds, the unauthorized legal threats, and the systematic harassment of community members. I'd also be reporting their law firm to the State Bar Association for their role in what appeared to be an organized scheme to defraud homeowners. I would also be recommending that the State Attorney General's office investigate whether the HOA had violated consumer protection laws by misrepresenting their authority and using deceptive practices to collect unauthorized fees. And since they'd specifically demanded that I follow all applicable laws and regulations, I'd be filing a report with the FBI regarding potential mail fraud, since they'd been using the Postal Service to send threatening letters based on false legal claims. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The lawyer suddenly discovered that his firm had a scheduling conflict and wouldn't be able to continue representing the HOA. The board president started backpedaling furiously, claiming that there had been misunderstandings about the scope of their enforcement actions, but I wasn't finished with my compliance yet. Since they demanded that I remove my security camera to comply with community standards, I agreed to do so. However, as a police officer investigating potential criminal activity in the neighborhood, I'd be installing a much more comprehensive surveillance system to monitor for further evidence of harassment, intimidation, or fraud. This new system would be completely legal and properly permitted, but it would cover not just my property, but the entire street and common areas where criminal activity might be taking place. I'd also be conducting regular patrol visits to the neighborhood in my official capacity, since I now had reasonable suspicion that organized criminal activity was occurring in the community. The HOA president tried to object, but I pointed out that they'd specifically demanded that I follow all applicable laws and regulations. As a police officer, I had both the authority and the obligation to investigate potential crimes, and their own actions had created the reasonable suspicion necessary to justify ongoing surveillance and monitoring. The meeting ended with the lawyer and HOA president in a hurried conference outside the clubhouse while the other board members sat in stunned silence. Within a week, I received a letter from a different law firm informing me that the HOA was withdrawing all previous legal threats and violation notices. The letter included a formal apology and an acknowledgement that their previous enforcement actions had been overly aggressive and procedurally flawed. The HOA president quietly resigned his position and moved out of the neighborhood within the month. The law firm that had been representing them was indeed investigated by the State Bar Association and eventually had their license to practice suspended for 6 months due to their role in the fraudulent collection scheme. As for my security camera, it's still exactly where I installed it. The new HOA board formally approved retroactive permission for all reasonable home security systems, and they established proper procedures for future architectural reviews that actually follow state law and their own bylaws. The best part? Several of my neighbors who had been targeted by the previous board filed a class action lawsuit against the HOA for the harassment and illegal fees they'd been subjected to. Since I had thoroughly documented the criminal nature of the enforcement scheme, they had ironclad evidence for their case. The HOA's insurance company ended up settling for a significant amount, which was distributed to the affected homeowners. My wife got her butterfly garden back, expanded to twice its original size. The new HOA board actually commended us for improving the neighborhood's environmental friendliness and wildlife habitat, and I never received another violation notice, despite the fact that I eventually added solar panels, a small vegetable garden, and even a backyard chicken coop, all of which are now fully approved and properly documented. The whole experience taught me an important lesson about the power of malicious compliance. Sometimes when bullies demand that you follow the rules, the best response is to follow every single rule so thoroughly and completely that they end up wishing they'd never started the fight in the first place. These days, our neighborhood is actually a much nicer place to live. The new HOA board focuses on genuine community improvements rather than petty power games. Property values have gone up, neighbors are more involved in community activities, and everyone seems to get along much better now that we don't have someone actively looking for reasons to harass people. And whenever I see a new violation notice posted somewhere in the neighborhood, I make sure to drive by in my patrol car just to remind everyone that some rules are more important than others. The next one is a petty revenge story. A few of pieces of context. 1. This took place in the mid-90s when HIV/AIDS had much more stigma around it. 2. My husband is a very skinny guy. 3. I love to cook. 4. Our roommate was kind of a Kevin. When my husband and I were first starting out and super poor, we rented a room in an old servant's quarters attached to a Victorian. It was in a crap neighborhood with a crazy landlord, but it was cheap and a huge upgrade from our car. I had made brownies a few days before and they were getting a little stale. My husband went to cut them with a huge knife. Stupid, I know. The knife slipped on the Pyrex and went deep into the pad of his thumb. blood all over the brownies. We put a towel on the wound to keep pressure on it. I tossed the brownies into the sink and we rushed off to the ER for stitches. I didn't think to run water over those bloody brownies. When we got home, I noticed half the brownies were gone and our roommate was in his room with the door closed. Ew, but I wasn't going to say anything until... I saved a bit from 3 paychecks and bought a nice non-stick pan. I went to open the package and use it for the first time, and the packaging was gone and the pan scratched up. Best guess he had scrambled eggs with a fork. I was pissed. Then I waited. I think it was a week or so later that he came in the door when I was standing in the only doorway from the kitchen to the living area. Me. Kevin, you remember those brownies in the sink? Did you eat any of them? Kevin. Yeah, they were pretty good. I figured since they were already in the sink, you wouldn't mind. Then, I laid out the story in all its gory details. He slowly turned green, then looked like he was panicking. Kevin, can you get AIDS from eating blood? This pissed me off worse. My husband is skinny, but that's a bold assumption. Me, I don't know, but I guess it's possible, with my worried face on. At this point, he pushed past me and ran to the bathroom to throw up. He was in there for quite a while. I just smiled. He rarely talked to us after that, and he never ate our food. I never did mention the pan to him. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I have just found this Reddit and realized I have to tell you about the biggest plonker I've ever met. Around 15 years ago, I worked on a sales team and we got a new manager, Kevin. No one warmed to him. From day one, he strutted in like the second coming of Wolf of Wall Street minus the charisma. He couldn't go 10 minutes without reminding us how incredible he'd been at his last company. Apparently, he smashed targets, broke records, and worked his way up the ladder faster than anyone in history. If his mouth had a Fitbit, it would have hit 10K brags before lunch. The man didn't stop talking about himself and made no effort to get to know us, the team. At his first sales meeting, he opened with a monologue about his greatness that could have qualified as a TED Talk titled, "Why I Am Brilliant and You're Not." Then he laid into us about our sales figures. We were over target, but according to him, we weren't aiming high enough. We were a pretty nice and upbeat company, so there were lots of raised eyebrows and WTF shared looks, like how do you bollock a team who are airways over target? Then he was so full of himself, he actually said, I could hit that target on my own, so if you lot can't smash it as a team, something's seriously wrong. One of my bolder colleagues said, wow, what a fun and educational idea. Let's make it a competition, you versus the whole team. Everyone clapped and shouted a hell yay. Then, as if fate itself wanted to join the fun, our director heard the commotion and walked in. My colleague announced Kevin's going up against the team this month to keep us motivated and show us how it's done. The director agreed it was a great idea. The first week of Kevin versus the entire sales team was like watching a live-action version of David and Goliath. If Goliath was a middle manager with anger issues and David was literally everyone else. Kevin strutted in on Monday like he was about to deliver a master class but didn't achieve a single sale, or the next day, or the next several after that. Meanwhile, the team was having the time of our lives. Even our new starter, Jonathan, a sweet, nervous lad who'd never done sales before, was outselling Kevin by week 2. Every time Jonathan made a sale, the office would erupt like he'd scored in the World Cup. By the 3rd week, Kevin had entered what we'll call his tantrum era. Phones were slammed, headsets were thrown. At one point, he even dramatically announced, "This system is rigged." Kevin didn't make it until the end of the month. He left because he was pursuing other opportunities, which we all understood to mean fired for being spectacularly bad. My colleague was right, though. It was so fun and very educational. In our mutual hatred for Kevin, we worked harder than ever and smashed all previous sales records in company history, which felt extra satisfying being as this was Kevin's main brag. I looked him up on LinkedIn recently, and his bio reads, World-class sales director, open to new opportunities, which I think probably means unemployed for being spectacularly bad and still full of himself, so it seems he didn't learn much at all. The next one is an entitled people story. I had always hoped that the world would eventually awaken to the self-centered nature of people like Karen, but it seemed like that day would never come. Little did I know that I was about to become entangled in a gripping tale of entitled demands and escalating conflicts that would put my home, my family, and my very freedom at stake. My wife and I had recently settled into our new house after years of saving and anticipation. Expecting our first child added an extra layer of stress as we hurried to prepare the baby's room and ensure that everything was perfect. Our neighborhood was close to several colleges, making it an attractive location for students seeking off-campus housing. As such, some homeowners in the area rented out rooms to earn some additional income. However, with our family growing, we had no intention of accommodating a college kid. At first, everything went smoothly, but one day, a young man who barely looked old enough for college knocked on my door, claiming he wanted to live in my house. "Can I help you?" I asked, genuinely puzzled by his audacity. He replied, "Yeah, I go to college, and I want to live here." Surprised by his misguided assumption, I explained, "I'm sorry, but you must have the wrong house. We haven't posted any rental advertisements." Undeterred, he persisted, "This house is small, so it must be cheap enough for me." Chuckling to myself, I reiterated that we were not renting and closed the door. My wife and I shared a laugh, assuming it was some kind of prank or hazing ritual. We brushed it off, thinking it would be the end of the bizarre encounter. To my dismay, the following day brought another knock on the door during dinner time. This time, accompanying the persistent young man was a woman who embodied the very essence of a Karen. I braced myself for the inevitable annoyance. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I inquired, already aware that this encounter wouldn't be pleasant. With a demanding tone, Karen exclaimed, "Yes, my son came here yesterday and expressed interest in your property. However, you disregarded him without even listening." "I did listen to him," I replied calmly. "If he's looking for a rental, he should check online postings." Unyielding, Karen retorted, "This is unacceptable. My son will be starting college soon, and he needs a place to live." Unfazed, I responded, "Most freshmen live in dorms, and I can't offer a room for rent. That's not our problem." Indignant, Karen continued her tirade. "Dorms? I won't allow my son to endure such a horrible, cramped lifestyle like those poor kids. He deserves to live in a house, and this is the one he likes." Baffled by her outrageous demands, I reiterated, "We don't have a room for rent. I'm not sure how else I can explain this to you." Displeased with my response, Karen snapped, "A room? You clearly don't understand what we are trying to explain. You will give him the entire house. I wouldn't allow him to live with such a rude stranger. You need to move out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Her audacity knew no bounds. In a fit of frustration, I slammed the door shut, dismissing her absurd request. However, Karen refused to leave. She persisted, incessantly knocking and shouting through the door. Witnessing my wife becoming increasingly distressed, I knew I had to take action. Concerned for my pregnant wife's well-being, I quickly ushered her into our bedroom, urging her to put on headphones and drown out the commotion. Assuring her that I would handle the situation, I prepared myself for round 2 with Karen. But as I approached the door, a cacophony of police sirens suddenly filled the air, signaling the arrival of law enforcement. To my shock, Karen wore a smug expression, as if she had already won. It turned out that she had called the police, accusing me of trespassing in my own home. Tears welled in her eyes as she spun a tale about her son being the rightful owner of the house, which had supposedly been occupied by these vile squatters, my wife and me. The police wasted no time banging on my door and preparing to arrest me, but I refused to let this injustice stand. Amid Karen's hysterical cries, I managed to interject, informing the officers that I was the rightful owner and had the necessary paperwork to prove it. Karen vehemently argued that my documents were fake, further fueling the tension. Determined to resolve the matter, the police agreed to postpone the arrest until they could review the evidence and confirm the legitimacy of my claims. Meanwhile, the attention turned toward Karen, who now raged, insisting that the officers arrest us so her son could reclaim his supposed property. However, when the police asked the son to produce his own paperwork, he could only offer a blank stare in response. He had no understanding of property deeds or possession rights. It became increasingly apparent that Karen's claims were baseless. Acknowledging that everything seemed in order, with me as the rightful owner of the house, the police shifted their focus onto Karen. They sternly reminded her that calling emergency services under false pretenses and providing misleading information about a criminal activity was against the law. Karen's anger escalated as she was informed of the consequences of her actions. "Defiant until the end," Karen shouted, threatening to sue the officers and demanding their names and badge numbers. But the police remained unperturbed, leading her away in handcuffs and depositing her in the back of their squad car. As they drove off, the chaotic atmosphere finally subsided, and my wife and I were left to revel in the ensuing peace and quiet. Months passed, and we joyfully welcomed our baby boy into the world, unburdened by further troubles. The incident with Karen had only strengthened our resolve to protect our home and family. From that day forward, we vowed to never let anyone infringe upon our happiness or lay claim to what was rightfully ours. Our house was meant to be a sanctuary, a place where our family could thrive and grow, So as I reflect upon the battle with Karen, I realize that the world is full of challenging people like her. But by standing up for ourselves and asserting our rights, we can overcome their attempts to seize what belongs to us. Our home remains secure, and our lives flourish, forever free from the demands of entitled neighbors seeking to invade our sanctuary. The next one is a pro-revenge story. My first husband was not a very nice man. For 6 years, I was belittled and basically treated as a baby factory. He was a fantastic father, but a horrible husband. After he finally got his heirs, I was treated even worse until I finally woke up and decided to leave his ass. This revenge story is not about him. I just had to set the scene. I moved out of the house, taking just my clothes, the car, worth 4K no more, and the computer. I had nothing, and stayed at a friend's place for a couple of weeks before I was able to find a crappy townhouse with roommates. I had no furniture, and my bed was a cat pee smelling couch I was able to score. I ended up having 4 jobs, with one of them being full-time, and once a week I wouldn't even be able to sleep a night between jobs, meaning I had to stay up for almost 48 hours. Now, fast forward 1 year. My divorce was finalized, and I had fulfilled my year's lease for the townhouse. By this time, due to all my hard work, I had furnished the home, my bedroom, and my kids' room for when they would be with me for visitation. The scumbag landlord, let's call him SBL, was a somewhat nice landlord during my tenancy, and I was a good tenant, never being late with my rent. Although I had roommates, I was the sole name on the lease. SBL would show up often, with some excuse like plumbing tests or whatever, just so he could be creepy and hang around, trying to have conversations with me that had mild sexual undertones, which made me quite uneasy at times. Finally, the lease was fulfilled, and I was now on a month-to-month contract. At that time, I was ready to move out of this crappy townhouse and found a great house in the nearby mountains. I was simply thrilled now that I had my feet on the ground and could afford something a bit better than slum living. My lease stated that I had to give 1 month's notice in order to move out. Unfortunately, I was only able to secure the new house for the next month, which was just 3 weeks away. I sent an email to SBL stating that I intended to move out at the end of this month, in 3 weeks, and that he could try to find another tenant. But I did state that if he didn't find a tenant, I would still fulfill my legal obligation and pay next month's rent. Within 1 week, 2 weeks before I was set to move out, he emailed back and stated that it was very generous of me, but he had already found a new tenant for the beginning of next month, so I would be off the hook. He even tipped his hand by stating that he had already collected a deposit from them. Now, something happened a couple of days later, which was no fault of my own or my roommates. The townhouse came with its own appliances, including a washer and dryer on the main level. My roommate had put a load of laundry in and went to the living room to take a nap. He woke up to find that the washer had malfunctioned with the sensory switch, which never stopped the water fill stage, resulting in an inch of water in the kitchen and living room. He turned off the washer and called me for help. I had just finished work and rushed home to assess the damage. It was bad. There was standing water on top of the living room carpet and a good inch of water in the whole kitchen. I called SBL and informed him of the issue. By the time SBL showed up, I had already removed most of the standing water with the help of my roommate and friends who brought shop vacs. SBL didn't seem too upset, which surprised me. An appliance repairman had come to look at the washer and he confirmed the malfunction, showing how the dial would stick on the fill stage and not click over to the agitation stage. After replacing the dial and lubricating everything, he left. The next week was chaos as I was busy trying to pack, and SBL had insurance assessors and workers come in to evaluate the damage. They ended up removing the carpet and cutting out 2 feet worth of lower drywall from the whole main level. On the day of the move, even though I was supposed to be there for a couple more days, SBL let himself in while movers were moving out my stuff, and he went around taking pictures of everything. I initially thought it was for insurance claims. I felt bad for SBL and told him that I would not ask for any of my deposit back. He responded in front of the loading crew and my roommate, "Thank you, that's very generous of you." We parted ways, and I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks into my new home, SBL showed up on my doorstep with a summons to appear in arbitration because he was suing me. What? On what grounds? He claimed it was all in the paperwork he handed me. An 18-page manila envelope with detailed charges, including photos. Now I knew why he had taken pictures. He was nickel and diming me on everything from a bent Venetian blind, that was already like that when I moved in, to scuffs on walls and more. He even wanted me to pay his insurance deductible and the following month's rent. He claimed that the tenants he had lined up backed out at the last minute, stating that they didn't think the place would be ready in time with the new drywall and paint, so he still wanted me to pay that month's rent. Really? Duck. This. Crap. I knew I had been more than generous by letting him keep my entire deposit, and now he wanted to sue me for thousands? He was not only claiming the damages caused by the flood, but also improvements he needed to make that should never have been my responsibility in the first place. He even included cracks in the living room wall that resulted from the building settling. How was I responsible for that? He was accusing me of negligence, and I wasn't going to stand for it. I knew it was a slummy townhouse complex, and most of his tenants were on welfare. Maybe he could get away with this with others, but not with me. No way! I had just gotten out of a marriage that made me feel insignificant and destroyed my self-esteem. But now, I had my dignity back and felt strong for the first time in a long time. I wasn't going to let any more crap happen to me without fighting back. I had 10 days before the arbitration meeting. I immediately got to work. First, I obtained a signed deposition from the repairman who had examined the appliance, stating that it was in dire need of maintenance and that the last time he had done any work on it was almost 5 years ago. I thoroughly reviewed my rental contract and local laws, which revealed that SBL was obligated to have all appliances maintained and serviced every year. I also talked to some of the other tenants, and learned that SBL had sued previous tenants after the fact. I tracked them down, and obtained sworn statements from them as well. Unfortunately, most of them didn't know what to do and didn't show up for arbitration, resulting in SBL winning by default. I was determined not to let him do that to me. I drew up a rebuttal to each and every claim he made, including photos from the year plus that I had lived there. I printed out all my email correspondence and even convinced my ex-roommate and one of the movers who had heard my interaction with SBL about him praising my generosity to come with me. On the day of the arbitration, dressed in my power suit and with my ex-roommate and worker in tow, I showed up at the meeting. In Canada, arbitration is not held in a courtroom, but rather in a conference room at the courthouse with a judge. We had 1 hour with the judge. Since SBL was the plaintiff, he got to present his case first. He spent over 40 minutes going over everything while I sat quietly, patiently waiting for him to finish. Once he finished, I presented my multiple copies of the rebuttal to the judge, SBL, and anyone else who wanted one. I quickly went over each point. SBL was irate and interrupted me almost every second sentence. I paused every time he spoke and sweetly said, "I was quiet and polite during your time to present your case. I hope you grant me the same respect." SBL's face turned red, especially when I presented the deposition from the maintenance worker. I included the relevant sections of the Tenancy Landlord Act regarding appliance maintenance, and stated that it was the only record of maintenance that had occurred. Unless he could produce more recent records from another company, it had been over 5 years since anything had been looked at. In my defense, I also requested my deposit back and a day's pay from work since I had to take the day off for the meeting. The judge then made his statement, and I will always remember it. He said he was very impressed with my presentation, and that it was evident I had a good handle on things. He could tell that my nature was one of kindness and respect, especially through the photos of how I had furnished and maintained the townhouse, taking pride in my home. Bottom line, not only did I win my case, but SBL also ended up owing me over 80% of my deposit back, including interest. The look on SBL's face was priceless. The judge then informed SBL that they would be reviewing all his previous filings, and if there was enough evidence of harassment, he would be reported to the Board of Landlords and Tenants. I'm not sure what came of that. Now, I walked away from that day feeling on top of the world, completely justified, and he got a taste of his own medicine, but it didn't stop there. Oh no. Knowing that this guy had a history of suing tenants, I printed out the final results, with the judge's signature, and gave a copy to every tenant in that complex. I wanted to warn everyone about his practices and advise them to keep notes, photos, etc., so he couldn't do the same to them, but I didn't stop there either. He still owed me money, and I repeatedly asked for payment, but he never responded. He had a deadline to pay me back my deposit, so on that day I went to his house. I found his residence in public records, as he had to file under a certain address as a landlord, and knocked on the door. He didn't answer, though I knew he was home. I rang the bell a few more times and knocked loudly. He then turned on his house alarm, which initially startled me but quickly turned into amusement when I realized what a coward this bully was. I yelled loudly that I wasn't going anywhere. He shouted, "Get off my property or I will call the police." No problem. I stepped off the property but camped out on the front sidewalk. I had a fold-up chair, a cooler with water and sodas, a few sandwiches, and all my paperwork with me. I was prepared to stay there indefinitely. I started telling anyone who passed by, some were already there from the house alarm incident, about how I was a tenant who had been wrongfully sued and now had a claim against him, and he owed me money. I let anyone interested look at the paperwork as evidence. The police showed up. They first went to talk to SBL, who claimed I was harassing him, slandering him, and refusing to leave his property. I was on public property, the sidewalk, and it isn't slander if it's true, which I could prove with all my court-signed paperwork. I wasn't disturbing the peace. I was simply seated outside his home, talking to neighbors about his actions. He was out there yelling that I needed to leave, but I calmly stated that I would be happy to leave once he paid me the amount he was legally obligated to by that date. I wasn't going to leave without money in my hand, and I was more than willing to stay and tell anyone who would listen why I was camped out there. The police informed me that I wasn't doing anything wrong, that it was public property, I wasn't disturbing the peace, and it wasn't slander if it was true. Finally, after an hour of SBL yelling on his front lawn at the police, and at me, of course, his wife came out with money. She handed it to the police, who then handed it to me and documented the final payment. I smiled sweetly, thanked the police profusely, and went home. I have no idea what happened to SBL or if he is still pulling the same crap on others, but I hope I helped instill some fear in him that he can't just screw with people, because eventually it will come back to bite him. Sometimes nice guys, or girls, finish last, but with patience, they can finish with a win. The next one is an entitled people story. I work at a gas station, and I have two customers who are disgustingly disrespectful when it comes to learning disabilities. One is an entitled old man whom I call Hank. He talks to me as if I am deaf, exaggerating his words. I usually roll my eyes because he genuinely believes I am stupid. The other customer is a woman I call Karen. She acts as if I am required to know every cigarette brand on the wall or memorize their prices, which I refuse to do. She talks down to me as if I am a small child, especially when there is a line of customers. She also uses the R word casually as if it's trendy. So on this particular day, both Karen and Hank were in the store. Luckily, my manager was there too. I was about to take my break when Karen demanded that I serve her and process a split payment of cash and credit for gas. Both my manager and I explained to her that our system doesn't accept split payments. However, she refused to believe it and insisted that we make an exception. I went on my break and was reading when Karen made a snide remark to my manager, saying, "I didn't know she knew how to read." My manager, without skipping a beat, responded, "Why would you think she was illiterate?" Karen just scoffed and loudly stated, "Well, we all know disabled people usually fake it. I bet she doesn't even know the name of the book. Memnoch the Devil by Anne Rice. This copy is from 1995 and it was bought by my mother. I can give you a summary, but it might bore you." I smiled and finished my break. She glared at me. "I don't play games." "Neither do I," I replied, returning to stocking cigarettes and other products. Hank eventually approached the register with his usual drink and an attitude of false pity. "I would like 4 Marlboro Red shorts in a box, did you get that?" He spoke slowly and loudly. My manager looked at him and said, "You know she's not deaf." "Well, she is disabled and I was just trying to make it easier," Hank retorted. Finally, I turned around and looked at Hank. "It would be easier if you and Karen would stop acting as if the world is ending just because a person with a learning disability like me can work a real job. I shouldn't have to remind you to allow me to focus on my responsibilities so I can provide you with the customer service you need." Both of them stared at me, and my manager simply smiled and asked, "Are you happy now?" To sum it up, I have two ignorant individuals who can't seem to comprehend that people with learning disabilities can work jobs, even at a gas station. I am not deaf, nor am I invalid. I genuinely wish these two would stop acting as if their world has shattered just because I am here. The next one is an entitled parents story that happened to me yesterday. I'm on vacation at a touristy beach spot. I went out mid-morning to the beach before the crowds and set up my towel, umbrella, chair, cooler, etc. Around 11 a.m., while lying on my towel tanning with headphones in, I get a tap on my shoulder. I open my eyes to a middle-aged woman standing over me and her family and young kids starting to set up multiple umbrellas, chairs, and toys about 10 feet behind me. When I took my headphones out, the woman proceeds to tell me that my bathing suit is inappropriate to be around her children, and so I will need to move. Note: the bathing suit is a cheeky bikini bottom, but not a thong. I tell her I was there first, and they can find somewhere else to set up if it offends her. She proceeds to say there are no other close spots to the water. I tell her I'm not moving and put my headphones back in. About an hour later, I decide to hop in the water for a dip to cool off. While in the water, I look at the shoreline, and the woman has packed up my stuff with her husband and is carrying it away from the area. I hop out of the water and get a lifeguard to call beach security while I watch them walking my stuff up the beach to relocate it. Beach security and I approach them. They try to play dumb and say it's their stuff, so they are asked to open the wallet to show ID. Surprise, it's my ID. The cops are then called, and I choose to press charges for theft. And I got my spot back since the family was escorted, kicked off the beach. The next one is an entitled people story. I never imagined that my life would spiral into such chaos, with my own mother-in-law at the center of it all. This is the story of how my mother-in-law orchestrated a diabolical plan, leading to my arrest and nearly destroying my life. Buckle up, because this roller coaster ride isn't for the faint of heart. It all began with the passing of my beloved uncle, who bequeathed his house to me. At the time, little did I know that my conniving mother-in-law was scheming behind my back, forging documents to claim ownership of the property. Unbeknownst to me, she harbored a deep resentment towards me even before I married her daughter. She had hoped for my wife to marry a wealthy suitor, not a man like me. In a cruel twist of fate, my wife had been involved in a severe car accident and slipped into a coma due to brain trauma. As a result, my mother-in-law and I were forced to spend considerable time together, as we both cared for my wife during her incapacitated state. Our strained relationship grew even more toxic, but I tried my best to endure it for my wife's sake. Little did I know that my life was about to unravel in the most unimaginable way. One fateful day, my world came crashing down when the police stormed into my house, brandishing guns and accusing me of possessing an illegal firearm. I was dumbfounded. I had never owned a gun in my life. Despite my protests, they ignored my words and charged me with possession of an illegal firearm, trespassing, and theft of the house. In the eyes of the law, I was nothing more than a criminal, as my mother-in-law had cunningly manipulated the situation to her advantage. With my wife still in a coma, I had no one to advocate for me. Fear gripped me as I contemplated the prospect of spending years in prison for crimes I hadn't committed. Fortunately, the authorities decided not to detain me pending the resolution of the case. They released me, allowing me to seek legal representation and prepare for the impending court battle. However, I couldn't return to my home, which my mother-in-law had shamelessly occupied, tossing my belongings out like discarded rubbish. The rage and despair within me surged, but I was determined to prove my innocence and expose my mother-in-law's treachery. Although I was not a wealthy or highly educated man, I possessed a sharp mind. I knew I had to find evidence to support my claims and clear my name. I focused on two crucial aspects: disproving my mother-in-law's alleged travel to a neighboring country and obtaining fingerprints from the weapon she had planted. These pieces of evidence would be pivotal in unmasking her deceit. Fate smiled upon me when a benevolent favor from one of my uncle's friends, a lawyer, offered his expertise pro bono. Together, we launched a full investigation, scrutinizing my mother-in-law's travel history and collecting fingerprint samples from the weapon. It was a race against time to unearth the truth and secure my freedom before it was too late. Eventually, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The police discovered that my mother-in-law had indeed recently traveled to the neighboring country where firearms were readily available. Furthermore, the fingerprints retrieved from the gun conclusively implicated her, not me. The tide had turned, and the authorities finally started to believe my side of the story. Unable to provide legitimate documentation to prove her ownership, my mother-in-law's web of deceit unraveled further. They delved into the history of the house's previous owner, my uncle, finding no connection whatsoever to my mother-in-law. It became abundantly clear that she had fabricated everything to steal my inheritance and frame me for her crimes. The tables had turned on my wicked mother-in-law. The police dropped all charges against me and redirected their focus onto her. In addition to the illegal possession of a firearm, she faced severe consequences for forging official documents, an offense that carried a significant jail sentence. Finally, justice would be served. I filed a lawsuit against my mother-in-law to reclaim the lost possessions and bring her to financial accountability. Unable to afford a competent lawyer, she stood defenseless in court, with her actions haunting her as she faced the consequences of her malicious intent. It was a bittersweet victory knowing that justice was served, but the damage had already been done. After months of tumult and instability, I could finally return to my rightful home. The feeling of relief washed over me as I stepped through the door, knowing that I had reclaimed what was rightfully mine. However, the scars left by this harrowing experience would forever remain. The next one is a pro-revenge story. This happened around 20 years ago. Our family owned 2 apartment buildings, each with 3 units. We lived in 2 of them and rented out the other 4. There were nothing but these 3 flats lining both sides of the road for about a mile. Not all of them had parking. On the side streets, there were houses and very little street parking. We had more land than most of these units because it was also our home, so we had parking for around 16 cars. Everything was fine for literally decades. Then cars started appearing in our parking lot that were not from our tenants. One day I blocked one in. When I went outside, I saw that this a-hole had driven through our bushes and across the yard to get out. I called the cops, but there was nothing they could do. So I called a tow company and had them put up signs. We would have to call them to have a car towed. The signs seemed to work. No more random cars. Until New Year's Eve one year. I arrived home, and every space was filled. There were even cars on the street, blocking in the other cars. I was beyond pissed. I called the tow company, but they couldn't do anything for a few hours because they were so busy. We're in the Chicago suburbs, and it's below zero out. I had an idea. I dug out the lawn sprinklers and hoses. I ran one hose inside to the laundry room faucet and turned on the hot water. This way the hose and sprinklers wouldn't ice up. But the cars and the ground sure did. I used 3 sprinklers, moving them every half hour or so for almost 5 hours. Every car and every square inch of the parking lot, as well as the street by the cars, was encased in ice. I made it a point to spray ice into the locks, between the window seals and glass, and in the grills. Then I put away the sprinklers and hoses and went to bed. At 4 a.m. there was furious pounding on the doors and nonstop ringing of doorbells. We just smiled and called the cops. We waited until they arrived and went outside. The cops were holding back laughter. These people were told to park here by their friend who owned an apartment several buildings away. It was the same idiot who drove over our bushes. I pointed to the tow sign and told the people to move their cars or get towed. In our town, cops can ticket on private property with the owner's permission, so all the cars were ticketed. They were also towed since nobody could get into their vehicles. I wish we had it on video. The next one is a petty revenge story. I have dwarfism, and this often leads to weird interactions in public, especially with kids. Sometimes a kid comes up to me to ask why I'm so short, and I have a pre-prepared response for that, but most of the time they just loudly ask their parents why I'm so short. Usually the parents will awkwardly drag their kids away, telling them not to comment on people in public, which is sad but understandable. I like the parents who just say something about how some people are born like this, and even though we look a bit different, we're still regular people just like everyone else. Sometimes I hear a gem like, "I bet he shrank in the wash." What I can't stand is when people try to use me to parent their kids. I'm sure you can think of ways to convince your kids to finish their plate at dinner that don't involve pointing at a dwarf in public and saying that's what happens when you leave food on your plate, or he didn't listen to his mommy when she told him to eat all his vegetables. It's rude, it's humiliating, and it teaches your kid that differences are a bad thing and that people are at fault for their differences or disabilities. It just pisses me off. A few days ago, I was in public, and a kid who was maybe 4 or 5 years old was acting out, and his mom was clearly struggling to keep him under control. So she pointed to me and told her son that I was one of Santa's elves, and I was watching him and would tell Santa about his behavior. The kid's name was on a keyring on his backpack, so I just said, "It's okay, Hunter. You're already on the nice list, and Santa told me you're getting an iPad this Christmas." Hunter was excited. His mom was not. The next one is a malicious compliance story. So this happened a couple of years ago when I was 19 or 20, somewhere around then. As a wee lad, I got a job working at a local superstore while attending college. I was a cashier. It sucked. But honestly, it wasn't as bad as it could have been. My immediate manager helped protect the cashiers from the higher-ups. But those are war stories for another day. As time went on, as it does, eventually the dreaded holiday season came around. Thanksgiving week to be exact. I got the week off of school due to the holidays and was scheduled to work a juicy 40 hours that week. But unfortunately, I was scheduled to work on Thanksgiving and Black Friday. My schedule had Thursdays off, but Thanksgiving falls on a Thursday, and I was being forced to work. The good news is, at least they fed us a ton of food in the break room. That was honestly nice. But I was bummed that I had to miss the holiday with family since I had prepared to have the day off as I thought I would. Now, before we get into the main story, a quick note. The store did not allow overtime, OT. You were given extra lunches, sent home early, whatever they had to do to avoid paying out. If you got OT, you were either lucky or you had a major problem you were being made to handle. Management was salaried, and the enlisted workers were lucky to get 38-plus hours. No extra money for the folks in the trenches. As we are a major store that caters to everything from groceries to electronics, we prepared for a very long week that tends to mark the hustle and bustle of the holiday season as a whole. The energy is pretty low as we all really dread this time of year, and I am extra nervous. This is my first retail job on the front lines during the holidays, and I heard all the horror stories about what is coming. The store manager, SM, gathers up a lot of the workers for a quick announcement that Monday. He tells us that essentially we are really behind and have a ton of work to do, and this is going to be a rough and wild week. So he is authorizing any and all OT across all departments from today until Sunday. He told the managers and department heads that if an employee wanted to work, let them work. We need the coverage. Later on, we would discover what he meant was letting us come in on our days off to work an extra shift or two, tacking on a nice 8 hours to our paychecks. Whoops. If an employee wants to work a shift, let them work. And oh boy, oh lord, oh gosh, oh golly gee whiz, did we want to work? Let me tell you, we went crazy. I pulled 6 doubles that week. Someone parked their RV in the parking lot and worked what had to most likely be forbidden due to labor laws. People were working maximum hours. One day I worked so long our manager gave me 3 lunch breaks. Dozens of people jumped at this opportunity. The next day I came in and saw the overnight guys still puttering around. We milked that week for every hour, every cent of possible overtime. I don't recall all the numbers and such directly, but I think I went from a 72-hour paycheck to one that had about 118, and around 42 was OT, which was 1.5x paid. It's been a few years, but those numbers feel right. Also, if you work on Thanksgiving, you are given a single-use 25% off coupon to use in the store on one big order. Since I use my overtime on stuff to buy in the store, it felt like I earned an extra 25% on top of that. Management let it happen. No one said anything to the SM that week, and he sat in his office. It was 2 days after that week that some corporate suits showed up and gave him a verbal beating when they realized he blatantly authorized that. I think early on he realized his mistake, but the die was cast, and truth be told, we did need to get the work done. All that OT and we barely were ready for the open door on Black Friday. He was mad, shouted at a couple of managers after he got yelled at asking why they let us work so much, but they just shrugged. If an employee wants to work a shift, let them. It was immediately dropped, and it was clear it would never be allowed again, and policy would remain as it was. I bought a TV, a month or more of groceries, Christmas gifts for everyone, a new car battery, 2 new tires, and some random things here and there for myself. It was worth it. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. The next one is an entitled people story. Having a family that knows about your Reddit account has its disadvantages. Yesterday, my sister called me after I got off work to ask if comments were still coming in. She said she couldn't bear the negativity of looking at them herself because the comments were all so hurtful towards her. So I was brutally honest. At least 10 comments are still coming in daily, and most of them more or less say the same things about her. She started crying and demanded I delete my Reddit posts, but I refused and told her she can cry to anyone she wants. But the posts stay up because they are my assurance that she won't try to treat me like crap anymore. After all, she literally felt like my life should revolve around hers, didn't pay me the babysitting money she was supposed to, pocketed it for herself, and forced me to be the constant babysitter on last year's family vacation, so I had pretty much no fun the entire time. Is it really any wonder people have so much hate for her when she treated me like that? Then when I mentioned the posts have already spread to other websites because I was asked a couple of times to let an article be made about my situation, and there are some videos that were read as well. My sister shrieked hearing that and hung up. My parents then called me, begging me to take the posts down. I've refused and stated that I only did this because they didn't stick up for me. This would have never happened if they'd told my sister to treat me like an equal and not a servant. I'm not her butler, babysitter, or handyman. I'm her freaking brother and a grown-ass man. Wouldn't they be tired of this crap in my shoes too? They agreed, but still begged me to take the post down. I refused and said that I'll keep making more if they don't start sticking up for me more when my sister comes crying to them. Let her clean up her own messes, because all the enabling of her led to this. I didn't father those kids. I've got a life of my own, a career I'm still new to, and hopefully soon enough a girlfriend as there's someone I want to ask out. I'm moving my life forward, and I won't be held back. They can either step out of my way or keep trying to enable my sister. But I assured them that the latter would end badly for them. The only way this posting on Reddit will stop is if the drama stops. I've kept things anonymous, and I have a right to vent my very valid frustrations. Well, that left my mother crying. My father just went silent, and I said tears don't move me. They know what it'll take to end this, and that's to stop enabling my sister. Well, my sister called me again to yell at me that our parents have told her they aren't dealing with this anymore and to figure it out herself. Oh, and they told her to be nicer to me too. I just pictured her eye twitching as she internally screamed after hearing that. Be nice to my kid brother, what is this? Do I look it up on Google? Yeah, I was that sarcastic to her, but it left her crying too when I hung up. My brother-in-law called me later to get my side of the story. He was mad I'm still posting and made his wife cry, but I explained everything to him and he said he'd have another talk with my sister. I'm hoping this drama finally ends here. But the family vacation is still on for late June. I've already booked my room and put in for a day off work so we can all leave on a Friday. My room is also not near the ones my parents, sister, brother-in-law, and nephews will be using. In fact, it's not even on the same floor. And when we go to the coast, when it's not a family activity, I'm going to go where I want and do what I want. And you can bet I'm going to tour those art galleries, pig out on local food, and just enjoy being carefree for a change. The next one is an entitled parent story. A little context. I work at a water park roughly 30 minutes away from my house, and I got my job from being friends with the director and having another friend in the business, but don't think for a second that I don't work. I'm the second hardest working person there, and I've received the Employee of the Month twice in the single year I've worked there, so I knew people there and people liked me. I don't particularly like kids, but I can handle them well enough. The water park also has two sections, the kids' side and the adult side. This story takes place on the kids' side of the park. All of my fellow employees hate working on the play structure. It has a slide and kids are annoying, so I decided to take it for the day, take one for the team, you know. So I was up in the play structure and my job was to send kids down the slide when it was safe for them to go. This little girl comes up to the top and wants to go down. I wait a second until I see the other kids start to get out, then turn to tell the girl she can go, but she's already halfway down the slide. She nearly hits the kid because he was slow to get out. She comes back up and I kneel down and say, "Hey, that was dangerous. You could have hit that kid and both gotten hurt. Please wait for me to tell you when it's safe to go down the slide." She nodded and actually followed my instructions. But this is when she broke the rules again. At the entrance to the play structure, there's a sign that gives the rules. Wait for the worker to let you go down before going down the slide, and you aren't allowed to go face first. She decided to ignore Rule 2 and went down face first. She came back up again, so I knelt down again and said, "Hey, you can't go down head first. You could hurt yourself." She nodded and then went down head first again, anyway. The play structure works on a 3-strike system, so as that was her third time breaking the rules, I had to kick her off the slide. So when she came back up and started to walk towards the slide, I stepped in her way and said, "I'm sorry, you broke the rules 3 times, so you can't go down anymore." She yelled at me and tried to push her way past, but I'm bigger and stronger than her, so she couldn't get through and went back down the stairs in a huff. A solid 10 minutes passed, then she comes back up holding her mother's hand. Her mom says, relatively calmly at first, "My daughter told me you told her she couldn't go down the slide anymore. Is that true?" I said, "That is correct, ma'am." She asked me why, so I explained that if a person breaks the rules 3 times, they can't go down the slide. She gets closer to me and says, "Okay, I understand that, but she's 4 years old." I respond with, "Ma'am, it doesn't matter how old she is. She still broke the rules 3 times, so she can't go down the slide anymore today." She gets even closer and says, "Okay, but she's 4." I respond with, "I understand, but the rules apply to big kids the same as they do for the small kids, so she can't go down anymore today." Now, I'm 19, close to 20, relatively tall, not super muscular, white, and gay. A lot of people tend to notice that last one since I don't try to hide it. You can usually tell based on my mannerisms and the way I talk. Another thing I deal with, severe anger issues. And based on trauma from my childhood, people being in close proximity to my face makes me incredibly uncomfortable. This lady was maybe an inch away from my face when she started yelling at me and calling me a fucking FG. I was so close to losing my cool, I could actually feel my face turning beet red. My hands were balled into fists, and my jaw was incredibly tense. A bit more about me. I might look like a scrawny white kid, but when I get angry, I look like a demon, not my words. I wasn't even doing anything, and I was terrifying her daughter. In an attempt to keep my cool and to get this wail out of my face, I said, "Ma'am, please don't call me slurs. It's uncalled for and rude. I'm only doing my job." To my surprise, she actually got out of my face, scoffed, and said, "Let's go find someone in charge." Apparently, she had a day pass because I saw her later that evening talking to my manager. She looked over and saw me cleaning, and I just heard, "That's him!" My manager, Herm, who hates me by the way, comes over to me and asks me if I assaulted this woman's daughter. I, of course, said I didn't, but because he's a rampant asshole, he went to look at the cameras anyway. He saw that I was right in what I did and that I did everything according to procedure. We then went over to talk to the lady. She said, "Well, is he in trouble or not?" Herm looks at her and says, "He never did anything wrong, and he never assaulted your daughter." Then he gets this strange look and asks for her day pass. At first, she refuses to give it to him, then relents and gives Herm her pass. Turns out she wasn't even supposed to be there. Her pass had expired the day before, but she just didn't leave the hotel. So I had the privilege of escorting her to her room, waiting outside while they packed, and then escorting them out of the building. She was cussing me out the whole way out of the park, in front of her 4-year-old daughter, no less. Mom of the year, everyone. As we got out to her car, right as she got in, I said, "Thanks for coming to Name of the Park. Feel free to never come again," with the biggest grin on my face because that was my first Karen. At least it ended well. When I got inside, my manager told me I handled the situation very well, and I had a pretty uneventful end of the night. So please remember not to be rude to the workers because we're often right. The next one is an entitled people story. I've always believed in the power of hard work and responsible financial decisions. After years of dedication and saving, I finally achieved my dream of retiring comfortably with a beautiful house and a backyard pool. Meanwhile, my neighbor seemed to have a completely different mindset. He was younger than me, but had a reckless desire to get rich quickly and squander his money. Though I didn't particularly like him, I couldn't ignore the fact that he frequently shared his questionable activities with me. One day, he even offered to help me evade taxes by using his dubious methods. I promptly declined, opting for the straightforward approach of paying my taxes and leading an honest life. He also made several not-so-subtle attempts to sell me drugs, which was quite baffling to me. Weren't drug dealers supposed to keep a low profile? Despite his flaws, I didn't consider him to be an inherently bad person, just someone misguided in his pursuit of wealth. However, there was one thing that irked me about him: his evident jealousy over my pool. On numerous occasions, I caught him trying to sneak into my yard wearing swimming trunks, attempting to enjoy my pool without permission. Firmly and resolutely, I would chase him away, and he never put up a fight. While he did ask if he could host a party at my pool, I always denied his request. Surprisingly, he never persisted, so I couldn't quite decipher his character apart from his desire to acquire riches without putting in the hard work. One weekend, I embarked on a trip to visit my son, who had recently become a father. I didn't worry much about my property since I lived in a decent neighborhood and had installed security cameras. My son had even helped me set up an app on my phone to monitor any unusual activities remotely. During the final night of my trip, my phone alerted me of motion detected in the backyard. Assuming it was a raccoon, I didn't think much of it. Little did I know what awaited me upon my return. When I arrived the next day, I found my once pristine pool area in utter disarray. Empty beer bottles and drugs littered the ground, and the water had an unusual color, indicating alcohol had been carelessly spilled. Cups, plates, and even items of clothing were strewn all around. I promptly filed a police report and provided them with the footage of the party that I had captured on my phone. It was the final straw with my neighbor, and I decided to press charges against him for trespassing and property destruction. As expected, he was obligated to pay for the damages, but with the extent of the destruction, I doubted he would have much left. Moreover, the presence of drugs in the video prompted the police to obtain a warrant and search his house, leading to the discovery of a significant quantity of narcotics. Consequently, he faced charges related to drug possession and intent to distribute. While the trespassing charge might have seemed trivial in comparison, I couldn't let it slide. It was time for me to take matters into my own hands. I contacted the IRS, informing them about my neighbor's boastful claims of evading taxes in his business. I urged them to investigate further, which they promptly did. Unveiling his deceitful tactics, they discovered that he had been fraudulently writing off his business taxes by disguising them as large donations to a charity. However, upon investigation, they realized that the charity was merely a front, redirecting funds back into his personal account to evade taxes. It was a poorly constructed scheme, and the IRS saw through it immediately. Consequently, his business was shut down, and any prospects of starting a new venture were extinguished. I wasn't privy to the exact duration, but due to the multitude of charges against him, he was sentenced to spend a considerable amount of time behind bars. The guy who aspired to get rich without working and who had invaded my pool was now penniless and confined within prison walls. I don't wish ill upon anyone, but it was a poignant lesson about the consequences of pursuing wealth through illegal means. The next one is a pro-revenge story. So I live in a quiet little town in the Midwestern United States. My house is the last house at the end of a sleepy little dead-end road. A new guy moves in next door, let's call him Dick. Dick was probably one of those guys who was so popular in high school that he thought he had it made without doing any work and tried to spend the rest of his life living off being the cool guy. He's the type of guy who drives a lifted truck and a motorcycle. Don't get me wrong, I ride motorcycles myself. What I don't do is sit in my driveway at 2 a.m. and rev my engine. There's a bit of a downhill slope from the middle of the street to our houses at the end, and Dick likes to race down this hill, then lock his brakes and drift into his driveway. The first winter after he moved in, I noticed that my mailbox had been crushed, and there were fresh tire tracks in the snow leading down the street, over my mailbox, and into his driveway. A few days later, I saw Dick standing outside and asked about this. He denied the entire thing, saying he didn't know what happened to my mailbox and that it must have been a delivery guy or something. I figured whatever, and fixed my mailbox. A few months later, the same thing happened again. I fixed my mailbox and moved on. Sometime later, this happened yet again. This time I was pretty pissed, so I talked to my cousin, who's a commercial welder, and had him make me a mailbox out of some scrap quarter-inch steel plate, which was mounted on a length of old railroad track for its post. A little bit of glue and some cedar shingles, and you'd never know it wasn't a typical wooden mailbox. Also, the railroad track post was sunk in concrete 4 feet into the ground. For the next several weeks, I waited with anticipation every time I heard his truck roaring down the street, but nothing. Until about 5 months later when I heard his truck, then a crash. By this time, I had forgotten about my mailbox and thought for sure he'd struck another car. I ran out to the street to see if anyone needed help, and there was his truck broadside against my mailbox, all smashed up. He saw me walk up and started yelling about how I had destroyed his truck and he'd make me pay, and he called the cops. A cop showed up to take his report, and Dick pointed out how my mailbox had been specifically designed to destroy his truck. I gotta admit, I got nervous at this point. The cop looked around at the truck and the construction of the mailbox, then turned back to us and asked me if I'd had trouble with my mailbox before. I explained how it had been smashed several times in the past year. The cop then said, "It's pretty clear what happened here. This is an obvious case of wanton destruction of property." My heart sank to the ground, and Dick got a smug look on his face. But then the cop turns to Dick and says, "I'm going to issue a citation for this, as well as reckless driving." You should have seen Dick's face at this point. He was boiling with rage as the cop wrote him 2 tickets and told him he needed to pay for the repair of the damaged wood on my mailbox. The metal was fine, hadn't even tilted it, but the wood camouflage had broken off. The next one is a petty revenge story. This actually happened many years ago now, but I was dining at a restaurant with friends around 9-ish in the evening. Not a fancy restaurant by any means, but an affordable, delicious option that's always open late. It wasn't busy, and there was one very bored waitress who looked to be in her 40s. She put on a perky face and took our orders. Being a picky eater, I asked for a burger with no lettuce or tomato. I'd ordered the exact thing dozens of times before with no real issues, but something was off about this waitress. "It comes with the lettuce and tomato, honey," she said like I was stupid. "Yeah," I laughed, thinking she was just teasing me at first. "I just want the cheese, though." "It just comes like that. That's how we make it, with lettuce and tomato," she said matter-of-factly. I looked at my friends for some sort of help and only received dumbfounded looks in return. I said as nicely as I could. "Would you just leave the lettuce and tomato off?" I was waiting for her to understand, but she acted like I was speaking nonsense. "Sorry, but that's just how we make it," she replied, clearly annoyed now. "But if you don't like it, just pick it off, sweetie." She finished taking our orders while I sat there, stunned. Picking off lettuce and tomato is easy enough, sure, but on rare occasions when the restaurant had forgotten to leave it off for me in the past, it usually left the bun soggy and tasting of the toppings I disliked. Hence why I asked for it not to be assembled that way. And I did everything I could, in my very confused state of mind, to be polite to this woman, especially because I started to wonder if she was 1, on drugs, 2, messing with me to win a bet, or 3, profoundly stupid. I did end up receiving a burger with lettuce and tomato, surprise, surprise, and the bun was soaked by the questionable-looking piled-on tomatoes. It even looked like they had managed to add more toppings than usual, and I wondered what I ever could have done to this strange waitress to make her mess with my hunger like that. Did I hurt her in a past life? I asked if I could at least get a fresh burger bun because it was so watery, and she just looked at me, exasperated, and said, "This again? Just pick it off. It's fine." I never made a scene, I never asked to speak to a manager, and I ate my fries and the parts of the burger I liked. I honestly don't really like confrontation, but I did get a bit of petty revenge in the end. On the table, I left her the oldest, dirtiest $1 bill from my friend's wallet as a tip, because you should always tip your servers. But I put the lettuce and tomato on top of that nasty dollar bill with a note saying, "Just pick it off, sweetie." I wish I could have seen her face. The next one is a malicious compliance story. So this happened a few years ago. I was a union delegate at a large firm. We had a manager called Karen, I've written about her before on this subreddit, who was appointed to her role by a director of the company. Let's call the director her uncle. Karen wasn't very clever. She hadn't finished high school and previously worked as a receptionist. She once told me 40 was half of 100. Karen is struggling in her job and basically does nothing. Her desk is a mess of paperwork. She also looks after all the small departments like records, security, stores, etc. If anyone takes on Karen, the director steps in and Karen gets a get-out-of-jail card. There were a few occasions when Karen got yelled at by a manager for making costly mistakes, and Karen was put on stress leave, and the manager got a warning. One of the paralegals, Sally, from Records, comes to me to say she thinks she's in trouble. Sally recently had 6 weeks leave. She was forced on leave due to having too much annual leave. Once you have more than 6 weeks, you are forced to go on leave until you have no more than 2 weeks. Sally tells me that HR and Karen enforced her on leave, and she submitted a paper leave form the same day Karen was put on stress leave. Sally went on leave, came back the same day as Karen. Sally's leave wasn't docked, she just got paid as per regular. While Karen was away, they replaced her with Paula, who found Karen hadn't really done any work for 7 months. I found Paula and casually asked about what happened. She told me that on day 1, she threw all the paperwork out and started over again. So I attended a meeting with Sally, Karen, and HR, knowing there isn't a record of Sally's leave. Karen starts the meeting on a verbal rampage about Sally not doing as she told her to do. Sally needs to go on leave now or else, and she doesn't want to hear excuses. I interject at this point and point out to HR that Karen's behavior is unacceptable, but we agree, QMC, that since Sally has over 8 weeks leave now, she will go on leave effective tomorrow. Sally submits a leave form to Karen, and we leave the meeting. Sally's leave is reduced on her payslip this time. No one questioned a thing. The next one is an entitled people story. I need to get this off my chest. As some of you may know, I'm a capybara farmer, and recently, due to the viral trend around these amazing creatures, my peaceful capybara farm has turned into a hotspot for self-entitled content creators looking for their next big viral video. They've trespassed, they've stolen, they've subjected my capybaras to stressful, inappropriate behaviors. I am deeply disturbed by their lack of respect and total disregard for the well-being of my animals, not to mention the breach of my privacy and property rights. But things escalated beyond belief. Just last week, one of these trespassers, a man looking for some adrenaline-filled footage, decided it would be a great idea to wrestle a capybara. Not only is this incredibly distressing for the animal, it's also dangerous. And surprise, surprise, the man ended up seriously injuring or losing part of his genitals. This man, the one who trespassed and harassed my animals, is suing me. Apparently, he thinks I'm responsible for damage to his reproductive organs that occurred while he was illegally on my property and distressing my animals. A few days ago, I woke up to find my capybaras all huddled together in one corner of the farm, clearly terrified. Upon investigating, I found a person dressed in a homemade capybara costume, trying to live among them for a 24 hours living as a capybara challenge. It's clear there was some sort of sexual element. Not only had they trespassed onto my property in the dead of night, but they were also equipped with various props and toys they thought capybaras played with. A beach ball and a squeaky toy, among other less tasteful things. They were actively trying to coerce my capybaras into engaging with these objects' toys for their video, causing immense stress to the animals. When I confronted them, their response was shocking. They argued that they were doing the capybaras a favor by making them famous. They truly saw nothing wrong with their actions. I had to call the authorities to have them removed from my property. The disrespect for private property, the welfare of animals, and basic human decency has been simply mind-boggling. The next one is an entitled parent story. I argued with my husband about whether or not to post this because I'm pretty sure this will make the local news, and I didn't want to burn this account just yet. But he won RPS, so here we are. Prepare yourself. This story has layers. We were at the dreaded big box store picking up potting soil because we're going to DIY ourselves through the isolation. Things aren't crazy here, yet, but there is a 2 per customer limit on a majority of items. I assume this means everything, so we're getting 2 bags each of a few different types of soil. My husband is loading the last of 8 bags on our cart when I hear her. I know it's a Karen just by the level of unnecessary outrage in her voice. Karen, are you kidding me? Not a lot of people out here in the garden center, but we all look to her. I was almost disappointed to see she didn't come with the requisite haircut. She actually looked like a frazzled mom, her kid tugging on her hand and an overfull handbasket of groceries. And I had a moment of girl, I feel you. But damn it, she was pointing at us. Karen, you can't buy that many. You are hoarding, my husband. Yeah, we can. We're getting 2 each. Karen, oh, you don't fool me. I know what you're doing. My husband, so do I. Duck off. I'm just sitting there imagining all the ways I'm going to rock his world tonight. Well, Karen huffed at that, spun around, and yanked her kid back inside to go complain to the employee working the register nearby. Now we already paid for our items. The employee had come out and scanned the bags earlier, and he could easily see our cart from inside. So, being finished, we pushed the cart out of the garden center into the parking lot. And then the automatic doors open behind us, and I hear, now they're stealing. Juice, great. We load the soil in the car and turn around to bring the cart back and look at plants. By the time we get back, Karen has given up on trying to convince the employee we're the Bonnie and Clyde of dirt, and is now trying to negotiate skipping somebody in line. She has a child, you see, in her handbasket. Well, it's just so full and heavy. Could she please just scooch right on in here real quick and it'll just be an extra second, she swears. The woman Karen is trying to skip is young, maybe college age, and wearing a face mask. Not a medical mask, but the stretchy kind you'd wear while riding a motorcycle or when you're skiing. My husband has just informed me it's a neck gaiter. The mask is black and has scary wolf teeth on it that honestly made the girl look like somebody you should not mess with, even though she was wearing a Gap t-shirt and flip-flops. Mask Girl is just shaking her head no, and that's all I got as we dropped off the cart. I browse, pick up a couple plants, and we head inside to wait in line. Now it's showtime. Karen and Mask Girl are near the register facing off, no pun intended. From the looks of things, Mask Girl finished her purchase, and Karen stopped her before she could leave. I don't know if she grabbed her or anything, but Karen was still holding her full handbasket, so she hadn't checked out yet. Well, she hadn't paid for her groceries yet, because clearly this woman had checked out. Karen: but you don't even need it now, you're leaving. My son could get sick because you won't give it to him, and he needs it. Mask Girl: hell no, you can't have it. Back off, lady. Karen: but my son really likes it, and it's obviously made for boys anyway. Why would you even want to wear something so scary? Mask Girl: because I like it, and it has my germs on it. Why would you put a stranger's mask on your kid? Karen: oh, why are you being so rude? You wouldn't let us go through the checkout first, and now you're making my son very upset. Mask Girl: your problem, not mine. And then Mask Girl turns to leave while Karen manifests the biggest balls ever and grabs Mask Girl by the back of her mask. Let me make a side note here. When all of this is going down, we're all just standing in line and watching. The register is still going boop, boop, boop as the employee scans items, but otherwise, we are all just inside this hypnotic bubble. But when Karen reached out towards Mask Girl, it was like the bubble popped and made everything crystal clear. Not slow-mo or anything, but I absolutely felt hyper-aware. Like Spider-Man. Karen reaches out. People on both sides of me inhale loudly. Karen grabs the mask and yanks. A lady on my right yells, and my husband steps forward, so getting laid tonight. Mask Girl tucks her head down and she turns to Karen like a pissed-off bull with a bright and shiny new target. I think Karen was going to say something like, "Don't walk away from me" or something, but all she got out was, "Don't crack." I looked around because the noise was so loud I figured the roof was about to cave in, but out of the corner of my eye I see Karen spasm and drop to the floor writhing. Little Miss Mask Girl had a ducking taser. I don't know when she pulled it out, this tiny little flashlight-looking thing, but she laid Karen out with it, and not one of us moved for what felt like forever, like we were frozen. And then it was ducking bedlam. A security guard shows up, more employees show up, Mask Girl is chilling like she's been through this before and knows what comes next. The kid is screaming that the wolf girl killed his mom, even though she's groaning and sobbing on the floor and clearly not dead, but maybe wishing she was. The people that had been in line with us were all talking at once, trying to tell the security guard what happened. We hung around just witnessing the insanity for maybe 2 minutes, before Karen started choking out demands for an ambulance, the police, a lawyer, the mayor, restitution, and reparations. My husband made eye contact with an employee and got a thumbs up when he put the plants on a shelf and pointed towards the door. We got the duck out of there. We drove home in silence until my husband parked the car in our driveway, and then we just burst out laughing. Neither of us has ever seen anything like that before. We live in a small beach town. People are super laid back and mellow. Karen was anything but, and I hope to never see her again. The next one is an entitled parents story. I was traveling on my city metro. It wasn't very crowded at that time, but all the seats were occupied. Nonetheless, you could freely stand without being bumped by a stranger. There was this kid sitting in the reserved seats, the ones for people with disabilities, pregnant women, and the elderly. Definitely not for moms of 2-year-olds. He was probably 14 or 15, I don't know. He is the hero of the story here. Then at one stop, our entitled mom comes in. She has this cute little child who is trying to keep up with his mom's pace. Entitled mom instantly notices our hero sitting in the reserved seat and just stares at him. I guess this was her way of making people automatically give up their seats or something. The kid didn't move, though. This probably irked entitled mom a lot, I guess, because she moved towards the kid with heavy steps. She comes near him, stops, and again stares. The kid doesn't budge. Then she starts screaming. If she didn't have the whole compartment's attention earlier, she had it now. She starts berating the kid for sitting in a reserved seat and not giving it to someone more deserving like a mother herself with a young kid. I don't know what her logic was. The seats aren't reserved for them anyway. She just keeps shouting and screaming and tries to get others' opinions on it, and for a while people were on her side. Then the kid, out of nowhere, rolls up the right side of his jeans and detaches the artificial leg, placing it in front of entitled mom. The look on her face was priceless. It looked like she was mortified and embarrassed at the same time. She just backed away silently and got off at the next stop. I don't think that was her stop. The next one is an entitled people story. I live alone in the serene countryside, working as a cattle rancher and livestock farmer. Life had been peaceful until a group of real estate bigwigs bought a nearby patch of farmland and transformed it into a suburban neighborhood called New Alexandria. At first, I resisted the invasion of privacy that came with new neighbors, but I eventually adjusted to the idea. Little did I know that the Homeowners Association of New Alexandria would become the source of my troubles. The first encounter with the local Homeowners Association was amicable. Glenn, the newly elected president, approached me one summer morning while I was working in the barn. Despite his wheezes and pauses, our conversation flowed smoothly. His visit actually warmed me up to the idea of having friendly faces nearby. However, things took a turn when Glenn approached me with an offer to buy my land for Homeowners Association expansion. Although the cash settlement was tempting, I cherished my life in the countryside and declined his offer. Glenn's reaction was startling. He seemed personally offended by my refusal. His subsequent attempts to convince me only deepened our animosity. As families started moving into the neighborhood, their children grew fond of my horses. I often rode through the streets, bringing smiles to their faces, but Glenn despised horses with an inexplicable passion. One morning as I rode down the street, he exploded in a fit of rage, shouting and waving his arms like a madman. I barked back, trying to calm both him and my horse, but the commotion made my steed restless. Glenn hurriedly retreated indoors, leaving me perplexed. Later that evening, 3 knocks at my front door startled me from my sleep. I cautiously approached, gripping my shotgun for security. To my surprise, it was a police officer, a visit triggered by Glenn's relentless complaints. Though no crime had been committed, the officer left with a polite warning. It was evident that Glenn wasn't pleased with the outcome. A few days later, I received a suspicious notice from the Homeowners Association offices, a phony restraining order preventing me from riding my horse on Homeowners Association-owned land. Furious, I tore it up and discarded the remnants without a second thought. Glenn underestimated my knowledge of the law and assumed he could intimidate me easily. Instead of retaliating immediately, I decided to bide my time, allowing Glenn to revel in his perceived victory. After a few days, I returned to the neighborhood on horseback, ignoring his warnings. As I approached, Glenn's face contorted with shock, horror, and rage. He brandished a shotgun, threatening me with violence if I didn't leave the Homeowners Association property immediately. Panic erupted around us. Children cried, and my horse grew increasingly uneasy. Before I could assess my options, Glenn fired a shot, narrowly missing me and nearly unseating me from my mount. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I leaped from the horse and sprinted towards him. A well-placed punch sent Glenn crashing to the ground, unconscious. I quickly checked myself for injuries and, thankfully, found none. Unfortunately, my horse succumbed to its injuries. The chaos attracted a convoy of police cars, which swiftly secured the area and assessed our conditions. Glenn was taken into custody, while I was advised to seek legal counsel. Following a weekend hiatus, the court proceedings began. Despite Glenn's high-strung attorney, the judge favored my plea. I offered Glenn a plea deal, sparing him jail time but obligating him to work on my farm as restitution. In the end, justice prevailed, teaching Glenn a valuable lesson: never mess with a farmer on his own turf. Update. Since the incident, New Alexandria has witnessed significant changes. The community rallied against Glenn's actions, questioning his suitability as Homeowners Association president. A special election was held, resulting in the election of a new president, Lucy, who advocated for better communication and respect among neighbors. The incident also spurred a re-evaluation of the Homeowners Association's rules and policies. Residents now enjoy more inclusive regulations, allowing for activities like horseback riding within specified guidelines. Additionally, an equestrian committee was established to promote understanding between horse owners and other residents. As for me, I continue to thrive as a cattle rancher and farmer, contributing to the community in my own way. The incident served as a catalyst for stronger bonds with my neighbors, who now appreciate the importance of preserving the harmonious coexistence between rural and suburban lifestyles. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Circa January 2020, my friend made a stupid decision and bought a brand new car he couldn't afford. His insurance was around $400 a month, while he made about $10.25 an hour working as a shift supervisor at McDonald's. His car payment amounted to $795 a month. Now, with a wage of $10.25 an hour for 30 hours a week, he earned approximately $300 a week, or about $1,230 a month. So yeah. My friend came to me for help because I used to sell cars and had good knowledge of the industry. I reviewed his paperwork. The dealer indeed took advantage of him, but my friend was seeking a way out of this mess. While the dealer overcharged him for the warranty, gave him a higher APR, and added extra fees, none of that was illegal. I knew that the only way to help my friend was if the dealer had done something illegal. I examined the finance application that my friend had signed, and I had a sudden realization. No bank would approve someone for a $795 car payment if they were only making $1,200 a month. It simply didn't make mathematical sense. So I started searching through his paperwork for the finance application that the dealer had submitted to the bank. Usually, when you submit a finance application at a dealership, they take the hand-filled application and reproduce it electronically, which is a common practice. However, on the application that the dealer had submitted to the bank, they stated that my friend was the general manager of McDonald's, earning $70,000. Since my friend had good credit, it seemed like the bank didn't ask for proof of income. I went to the dealership with my friend and informed the sales manager that he needed to put me in touch with the general manager because we were going to unwind my friend's deal and return his trade-in. The sales manager and the GM both thought I was joking. Then, I demonstrated how the dealership's finance department had committed bank fraud. I showed the GM the finance application my friend had filled out, and then I showed him the one the dealership had submitted to the bank, pointing out the income difference. My friend actually made $14,000 a year, but the dealership claimed he made $70,000 a year. That was bank fraud, a felony. The GM realized that his dealership was in deep trouble. The evidence I presented was rock solid, and we were all on the same page. He asked, "Okay, so what can I do to make this right?" I replied, "Unwind the deal and give my friend his trade-in back." Unwinding the deal meant that the GM agreed to cancel the deal and essentially erase it as if it never happened. The GM tried to avoid it, but I stood firm and reminded him that we could easily take this documentation and make his life a living hell. He knew I was right. Besides, my friend needed a car to get to work the next day. The GM said he would look into it. When he returned, he unfortunately informed me that they had already sold my friend's trade-in. I said, "That's fine, unwind the deal, and let's put my friend into something as good or slightly better than what he traded in for." The GM asked, "So he'll buy a car similar to his trade-in?" I replied, "No, you'll give him a car similar to his trade-in." The GM responded, "It doesn't work that way." I told him, "It does when you commit bank fraud." The GM was upset with me, but I reminded him that I was being nice and things could get really ugly in this situation. Felony-level charges ugly, franchise losing ugly. So yeah, this is going to hurt, but it will hurt less if we do it my way. Reluctantly, the GM agreed and checked his inventory. He told me they had a 2007 Focus with 10,000 more miles. I said, "No, the car you give my friend needs to be the same or better than what he traded in." The GM countered, "I'm giving him a free car." I replied, "No, you took his trade-in, sold it, made money on that sale, and committed a felony in the process of selling him his new car. Now you're correcting that mistake. This isn't a free car for my friend. This is you correcting your mistake." The GM insisted that was all he was willing to do. I told him that if he couldn't do better than that, we would consult a consumer protection attorney and have a conversation with them. My friend didn't want to go down that route, but it was our plan B. Just as we were about to leave, the GM said, "Wait, give me a second." He returned and said, "I have an 08 Civic with 5,000 more miles. It's a Civic and not a Focus, but I can unwind the deal on the new car and put your friend in the Civic at no extra cost." We agreed. The GM had the paperwork drawn up. The old loan on the new car was canceled. They took back the new car, though they would have to sell it as used since it was already titled, which sucked for them, and they gave my friend a better car than the one he traded in. For those wondering why we didn't involve a lawyer from the start, we could have done that. However, courts take a long time, and this was a faster way to fix the situation. The next one is a petty revenge story. It was Christmas time, and the mall parking lot was jammed. Somehow, I lucked into a space near an entrance, and 4 hours later my friend Dawn and I staggered back to my car with full arms and very sore feet. But we'd be home in half an hour, so the end was in sight. We got the bag stowed and we buckled in, laughing ruefully about how exhausted we were. As I began backing out, a car was slowly pulling past right behind me. Naturally, I braked to wait for the car to clear my spot, but the driver saw my brake lights and realized she'd lucked out. All she had to do was back up and let me out, and my primo spot would be hers. But it couldn't be that easy. Another car was tight on her tail, and that driver wanted my spot too. And neither one of them was budging. The two drivers' faces got redder and redder as they honked, revved their engines to make the other driver think they were going to plow right into their car if it didn't move, and in general made utter asses of themselves over the parking spot. Meanwhile, my friend and I were trapped and getting pretty mad ourselves. After more than 5 minutes of this craziness, motor running but going nowhere, Dawn and I had had enough. We looked at each other and smiled. Then we got out of the car, locked it back up, and waved at the two disbelieving parking warriors as we headed back into the mall for a much-needed drink and a bite to eat. The next one is a malicious compliance story. So, my best friend loves it every time I tell this story. So I thought I would share it with all of you. In high school, I had an AP English teacher who was very opinionated in her grading. If she loved a book that the class had to read and you didn't, you wouldn't get a good grade on your report when you turned it in. I was an avid reader. In fact, I cleaned out my school library in 3rd grade. So let's just say I wasn't a fan of her literary selections. She was also the kind of teacher who thought her class was the most important one you had. Due to this, the workload was quite substantial. Coming up on our final exam, she gave the class a talk 1 week before the final. She would be weighting our grade for the semester, giving 60% of it to the final. She explained she was preparing us for college. However, since she was giving so much weight to the final, she would give us an opportunity to earn extra credit. For every 4 lines of the epic poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, that you could memorize and write verbatim on the back of the test, you would receive 1 point of extra credit. Goody hands time. I had a rough year due to her grading style, so I was getting a B in the class at the time. However, this was my moment to shine. I have a knack for remembering things. In fact, as a freshman, I learned all the lines for the lead role of Neil Simon's Rumors, 2 hours before opening night, due to the lead dropping out. I then performed the role for 3 nights without dropping a line. So this opportunity seemed made for me, and I wasn't going to let it pass by. I got home and looked up the poem. It was well over 400 lines. I got to work. The final exam finally came. I sat down confidently in my seat and eagerly waited to receive my test. We received our 15-page final and were told we had 3.5 hours to complete it. I put my name at the top and immediately flipped it over to the back. For the next 8 minutes, I ravenously wrote out 400 straight lines from the epic poem verbatim. With that step complete, I decided to look at the questions she intended for us to answer. It was filled with multiple-choice essays and fill-in-the-blank questions. I took a few minutes to fill in the blanks I knew, guessed at the multiple-choice ones I didn't know, and completely ignored her biased essays. Now for the fun part. After a grueling 15 minutes, a total of 3.5 hours for the final, I walked triumphantly to the teacher's desk. I flipped the test onto her desk and said, "Have a great summer." She said, "Very funny, it's a 3.5-hour final. Sit down and finish your test." I responded, "No, I'm finished. I got over 100%. She said, "Let me see your paper." She looked through my test. She saw the empty essays and empty fill-in-the-blanks. Now, even more annoyed with me, she said, "You haven't answered half of these. It's a 3.5-hour final. Sit down and finish your test." I wouldn't be denied. I said, "No, I'm finished. I got over 100%. At this point, she was getting very upset, and the color in her face was starting to shift. "How do you think you have over 100% when you haven't done half the test?" she demanded. With a big smile, I said, "Look at the back. You said for every 4 lines of The Rime of the Ancient Mariner we memorized and wrote on the back, we would get 1 point of extra credit. You will notice I have written 400 lines from the poem. By my math, that equals 100% of extra credit. Anything I answered in this nonsense is gravy, so I got over 100%. She turned beet red. Her knuckles were white, holding my paper, and she stared at me with hate in her eyes. I said, "Have a great summer," as I walked out feeling like I had just dropped Mike Tyson with a single blow. I got an A in the class. My final was 145% out of 100. The next one is an entitled people story. So, a few years ago, I was teaching at a private urban religious college. Since I only had my MS, I was thankful for the opportunity to teach and gain experience before pursuing my PhD. The school usually had me teach accelerated night courses, which were aimed at non-traditional learners. Read, adults returning to school after many years off. I loved my students and had a blast teaching them. I had some issues with a few students here and there, but generally my experiences were really positive. But there was this one couple. Let's call them Hannah and Larry. That semester, I had been asked to cover a more traditional course at the last minute. Instead of being accelerated, it met 3 times a week, for an hour, throughout the semester. Furthermore, the class was very small, only about 4 students. Normally, small classes can be great, and a paycheck is a paycheck. But it was challenging due to Hannah and Larry. You see, this couple had attendance issues, to put it mildly. They would show up to a class or two and then vanish for a week or more without any word. Just when I suspected they were gone for good, they would show up, usually with some excuse or another, medical issues, car problems, work, etc. At first I tried to be sympathetic. I always have the attitude that life happens and sometimes things get tough. But at a certain point I began to grow suspicious that they were making up stories. Okay, I was immediately suspicious, but I usually let things slide to a certain point, just like my professors did for me. This was worse because of the small size of the class. Every time I prepared for a session, assuming all 4 would be present, they would skip and disrupt my plans. But when I accepted that they would be absent and prepared activities for 2 students, they would show up. All of this would be frustrating, but acceptable if it weren't for 2 things. First, whenever they showed up, these 2 would have an attitude and expect everyone to conform to their presence and cater to their demands. Second, they, of course, weren't doing any of the work. These 2 factors reached a breaking point when Hannah, who was the louder and more confident of the 2, would almost demand extensions and the ability to submit late work. I would give them the extensions, only for both her and Larry to ignore the work again. I like to be accommodating to my students within reason, but it quickly became obvious that Hannah thought she was playing me and could get whatever she wanted. And that couldn't stand. I have some level of pride and hate being seen as a pushover. Now I could have immediately put my foot down and said, "No more late work." But I was sure Hannah would throw a fit and go to the administration. I knew the administration would back me up, but I didn't want the hassle. I was working on a second MS at this point and had 2 other jobs. I was extremely busy and hadn't even planned on teaching that semester. I only agreed because they needed me. Besides, I'm an easygoing guy, but I do have my limits. I was angry at this point, but I also have a wicked, to me, sense of humor. Hannah wanted to think she had me wrapped around her finger. Okay, let her think that. I was going to give her enough rope to hang herself. So for the past few weeks, whenever she asked for an extension, I would smile and say sure. Then I would chuckle when nothing came in. Every time I wrote her and Larry emails, reminding them of the new due date. Getting things in writing is key, kids. And then we reached the final exam. I hadn't seen the duo in a few sessions and was actually surprised to see them stumble in to take the test. They failed, of course. But what can you do? Hannah approached me in front of the class and asked for another extension. I put on my best teacher voice and expressed my disappointment. However, I said it was fine, as life happens. But I made it clear that I was posting grades the next weekend, and the absolute latest I would accept any late work was Friday at 11:59 p.m. Once it hit midnight, my books were closed. I asked if they both understood, and they showed a bit of solemnity when they assured me that they did. Good. I confirmed it in an email, and then sat back to grade the finals over the week. I mean, there were only 4 exams. It wasn't that much work. I knew there was a risk they would follow through, and I would end up with a semester's worth of work to grade. However, I was feeling pretty confident that wasn't going to happen at this point. Friday night arrived. I didn't work my other jobs that day, and my own schoolwork was done, so I decided to buy a few beers and relax by playing some video games. At a certain point, I glanced down and realized it was midnight. I opened my email and reminded everyone that the books were now closed. If I give an extension, it's open to the whole class. I'm not playing favorites. Not that anyone else needed it. I cracked open another beer, let out my best supervillain laugh, and went back to my game. Sunday came, and I was posting the final grades for the semester. I usually hate failing students, but I admit I had a smile on my face as I assigned Hannah and Larry their well-deserved Fs. 10 minutes after I hit save for the grades, I heard the familiar ba-ding of my email going off, followed by another. Now who could this be? It was, of course, Hannah and Larry. Larry's email could best be summarized as, "Oh my God, didn't you get my email with the work? I sent it on Friday." Hannah's email said the exact same thing. It was obvious they were thinking they could get another day or two by claiming they had sent the work. After all, hadn't I been so accommodating and gullible all semester? Oh, the fools, the fools. They played right into my hands, and this was the moment I had been waiting for. I double-checked to make sure I hadn't missed emails from them, just to be safe. Ooh, I hadn't. And then I typed my response. "No, I didn't, and I just double-checked after your last message. That's okay. Emails sometimes get lost." At this point, I like to imagine Larry smiling while reading this. He had won again. God, this professor is an idiot. I continued. "So, what I'm going to need you to do is go back into the email you sent me with the work. Just take a screenshot which has the timestamp of the email and forward that to me along with the work. That'll prove you sent it on time." I then responded to Hannah's email, saying the same thing. What was their response? Did their eyes widen as they realized they had been held accountable for their actions? Did panic set in? Were there tears? Howls of regret? The gnashing of teeth and rending of hair? Sadly, I'll never know. I never heard from them again. They didn't even bother making another attempt. And me? Well, I decided to buy some more beer that night to celebrate once again. Occasionally, I'll tell my current students the tale, a humorous reminder that 1, yes, I'm accommodating, 2, yes, I'm pretty laid back, but 3, I'm not an idiot and don't try to play me. It usually gets a good laugh, and if some of those laughs sound a wee bit nervous, all the better. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.